Sand! Sand! Sand!
You want to dance? Ask me nicely. Let's talk. Better listen very carefully.
No problem.
You having fun?
No!
Thanks.
Welcome to episode 5 of Jean-Claude Van Damme, the podcast where we talk about Van Damme movies because he died for our sins. Joining me today is my friend Rick Kelley. How are you doing, Rick?
I'm doing great, Marcus. How are you?
Very well, very well. So why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your Van Damme experience, kind of where you first came across him, your general thoughts on him, and why you picked today's film.
Sure, yeah. I grew up, I actually was looking through his filmography earlier today, and I realized I hadn't seen all that many, but when I was a kid, we watched Bloodsport and Kickboxer a lot. Those were mainstays,
I think any 20-something-year-old guy, yeah.
Uh-huh. Yep, absolutely. And, well, I'm not 20, but whatever.
Oh, yeah, what are you, 17? What's up?
Yeah, like 22 and a half.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so we watched a lot of Kickboxer, we watched a lot of Bloodsport, and those were my main introductions to Van Damme. I chose Cyborg because I'm interested in canon films in general. Partly, I suppose, because of like the recent spate of documentaries, but I've been interested in canon films for a while, and the sort of weird aspect of their exploitation, filmography combined with their weird art house stuff that came out simultaneously. It's just a very interesting story to me. So Cyborg's always been hanging out there as something I wanted to catch up on. So that's why I chose it.
Yeah, and it's a hell of a choice, because I completely agree with you on canon films, which, again, I told you, like, this is a good one for me, because it's a weird trifecta of three things I really love, which is Van Damme, canon films, and director Albert Pyun. But I love that about canon films, and I did see the Electric Boogaloo documentary, but I haven't seen the Go-Go Boys one yet that they did themselves. Have you seen both of those?
Yeah, I've seen both. I did.
Which one did you like more? Because I really enjoyed Electric Boogaloo.
Well, Electric Boogaloo is unsurprisingly the superior film, but Go-Go Boys has a lot going for it too. It's actually really funny that they beat Electric Boogaloo to the screen, which they even say in the closing frame of that film.
Yeah, which is totally their style.
Absolutely. No, they caught wind of it and decided they had to do it first, and they did.
Very cool. So this is from Canon Films, which, did several Van Damme films, notably Bloodsport, Kickboxer. I think they also did Lionheart, but it was distributed through Universal. But yeah, so they had this hell of a run in the 80s where they were producing all these kind of low-budget action flicks and exploitation picks and stuff like that. But yeah, like you said, on the side, they were also making these weird art house movies and giving these, like, kind of more auteurs kind of a chance to make films, like, because Barfly came out right around this time as well, which is crazy. But, so they're a weird thing. But basically, what sucks is that I guess it was going to happen sooner or later, but they just got a bit too much. They went a bit too far, a bit too close to the sun, because they did stuff like Superman 4, which just fucking crippled them.
Yeah, and Over the Top as well was the one of the big, that $20 million payday to Sylvester Stallone that didn't really pan out, I guess, because people weren't quite as into arm wrestling.
Who would have thought?
Yeah. In retrospect, it seems clear, but I guess at the time, it was worth a roll of the dice.
Well, and of course, you should tell people to check out your website as well, because you've written kind of extensively about canon films a little bit.
That's true. I have a website called LudditeRobot.com. And yeah, I wrote a couple of posts about this sort of stuff. It's fascinating to me.
It is, and this film especially, because it's this weird movie that probably shouldn't exist, but all just kind of exists because of chance and because of the cheapness of Golan and Globus. Which is basically that originally Albert Pyun was set to direct their Masters of the Universe sequel and an adaptation of Spider-Man, so they had deals with Marvel and Mattel, but then because they were basically going bankrupt by 87, they had to drop their checks bounced, and they had to drop their deals with Mattel and Marvel, so they had already dropped $2 million into like sets and costuming and stuff for those two films that Albert Pyun was going to direct both of. So he was like, give me a weekend. And then he kind of came up with a story for Cyborg over a weekend. And they gave him like, what, $500,000 more. So about $2.5 million is the actual budget, even though this film was more so made for $500,000.
Totally. Do you know if there's a precedent for that? I was trying to look around and see. Has anyone ever written an entire feature film based on leftover costumes?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm sure they've been repurposed plenty of times, but I don't think it's ever been such a pressing like catalyst to the film.
Yeah, it's like essentially to recoup the losses on costumes. That's incredible.
Yeah, and again, you can tell in this movie because most of the pirate characters, they look like they're out of a Masters of the Universe sequel.
They don't look like pirates at all. They're wearing chainmail.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, because it is this weird mishmash of like the Terminator and like Road Warrior, pretty much.
Right.
Yeah, it's weird. I don't really see so much of the Spider-Man stuff, but the idea of how they were going to make Spider-Man and Master of the Universe 2 was kind of ingenious and kind of a testament to how Canon made films. They were going to shoot for like 2 weeks on the Spider-Man project, and then they were going to spend 6 weeks and do the entirety of Master of the Universe 2. During that time, their guy playing Peter Parker was going to go like on an intense training regiment and get buff for the rest of the shooting, and then they were going to come back and do like 3 or 4 more weeks of shooting Spider-Man with the buff Spider-Man.
It's fucking amazing. It's incredible.
Yeah, so of course that didn't happen. But yeah, and Canon had a 3-picture deal with Van Damme, and they offered him this, Delta Force 2 or American Ninja 3, and he chose this because I guess, not a sequel, it's kind of his own thing, but he later said that he doesn't really like the movie, which I can't blame him.
Yeah. What's actually funny though is like not a sequel, but if you go to Rotten Tomatoes, it actually is its entry is Masters of the Universe 2: Cyborg.
Yeah, and I think certain TV stations would put it up like that too, like on their TV guide channels and shit. So I'm sure it's just really confusing for most people.
Yeah.
And what's weird is that, okay, so this is from director Albert Pyun, who also wrote it, although he did it under a pseudonym, which was Kitty Chalmers, which is the name of his cat at the time.
I was going to ask you what that was. I'm glad that you do.
Yeah, so directed by Albert Pyun, written by his cat, might as well have been. This is actually the first in Pyun's Cyborg trilogy, which is kind of silly because he's made like 24 movies about cyborgs. But this was considered first. He did a movie called Knights in 1993 that had Chris Christopherson in it, and one called Omega Doom in 96 that had Rutger Hauer in it. It was basically kind of like a cyborg Yojimbo.
Wow.
Yeah, but then of course there were 2 actual sequels to this film. There was a Cyborg 2 with Angelina Jolie and Cyborg 3 The Recycler with Malcolm McDowell. They were both unrelated sequels, but for some reason in the first sequel with Angelina Jolie, there is like a flashback sequence or a dream sequence that uses footage from this first movie.
Well, it's probably had a little bit of time to kill.
Yeah, exactly. They just had to pad it out a little bit. And this is actually the last official theatrical release from Golan and Globus canon before, after going bankrupt. Yeah,
no, it came out it was released in April, right? And Canon folded at the time current form in December.
Yeah.
Also, I just add that The Recycler is an awesome subtitle or subheader, whatever you want to call it.
Oh yeah, it is. It makes me want to see the movie.
I haven't seen either of those movies.
I saw the second one with Angelina Jolie, but I haven't seen the third one. But it's got Malcolm McDowell, and its subtitle is The Recycler, so it's got to be worth something, I guess.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I wish I was watching it right after we get off the phone.
Yeah, and, okay, so Van Damme kind of famously, kind of like he did with Bloodsport, he went in after a disastrous test screening, and Golan and Globus were like, fuck it, we need to make money, we're going to release it as is. And he's like, no, give me 2 months, and he basically re-edited it to get it where it is now. And it worked, because it ended up being a pretty good hit, actually. Even if you put the budget as $2.5 million, it pulled over $10 million at the box office, so it kept them afloat maybe a tiny bit longer. But there is actually Albert Pyun's Renegade Director's Cut out there, which I also own a copy of. Man.
The black and white?
Yeah, well, it's partially in black and white. It's weird. It's a weird work print version, because he basically took... because one of the main things that changed was the score. He had a completely different kind of more like cock rock score, and that got replaced. But he found, or the guy that did the original score had like a work print version of it that he scored, and he used that and kind of mixed that with other tapes he had to make his Renegade cut. And thank goodness for Van Damme, because that Renegade cut is not very good. It's basically the same movie, but it has, like, I know one of the things you must be thinking of in this movie is, a lot of crucifixing in this. What's that all about?
Yeah,
well, it turns out originally the pirates were Satan worshippers, and pretty much before just about every action scene, there is a voiceover by, like, Fender or his gang basically saying how they're doing this all for Satan and stuff. And it's a lot of weird shit. It's basically the same movie. Some of the scenes are kind of arranged, but it has this weird cock rock score. It does jump from black and white to color a lot. And yeah, it was Satanists.
That's so fascinating to me because, yeah, the crucifixion, like, fixation that goes on in this movie, I can't decide if it would be better or worse to know why.
I think it works much better the way it is.
The way it is, it's just this weird thing where they just love nailing people to crosses, and it's not addressed in any way, shape, or form. And it makes it kind of intriguing. You kind of let your imagination deal with why this might be. I don't think I needed to know that they were Satanists.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, so Van Damme, like, he should get some more editing credits, man. He seems to know what he's doing in there. But that kind of is a weird parallel, because I just recorded an episode of my other podcast on Southland Tales, and that was the main thing we were talking about, because Cole just watched the movie like regular. I did 2 hours of research, read all the prequel graphic novels, read a bunch of interviews with Rick Kelley, and it's like, no, knowing why this stuff is kind of ruins it. It's kind of better if it's just weird and obscure.
Yeah, you just encounter the text as it is, right?
Yeah, exactly. One other interesting thing to mention is one of the actors that played one of the pirates kind of lost his eye during filming while fighting with Van Damme, and he sued Van Damme and was awarded like $485,000 for it, so almost the whole budget of this movie.
Oh man, yeah.
But yeah, it was shot in 23 days, written in a weekend. It turned out relatively well for how it came about.
Yeah, I agree. It's not
good.
Cyborg good film.
No, but it's watchable.
It's so watchable. I was watching it like I actually when I was watching it the other night, I was really tired. I wanted to go to bed. I was home from work late and stuff. But I was like, I gotta watch Cyborg for this podcast, man. And I couldn't turn it off, actually. I stayed through the whole thing despite my fatigue, simply because I was, what is going on with this film?
Yeah, absolutely. And, okay, so I guess we can kind of jump into the film. First of all, I love that Canon logo every time I see it pop up.
Yeah, it brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah. So Van Damme in this plays Gibson Rickenbacker, which I'm pretty sure you don't actually ever get his name. I think they call him Gibbs a couple of times, and then at the very end of the movie, the cyborg lady calls him Gibson, but we never get that last name.
Absolutely not. I was waiting for it because I knew this in advance, and I was waiting for someone to, like, shout out, Rickenbacker!
Yeah, no, missed opportunity there. And I think that's something that is a little bit more in Pyun's director's cut, is that the names are mentioned a lot more. Because basically all of the main cast are named after, like, electric guitar brands and stuff.
Fender Tremolo.
Yeah, Strat.
The cyborg is Pearl, named after drums. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was kind of weird, but yeah, and of course this is an Albert Pyun movie, so there is a character named Brick Bardo, which is most famously known as Doll Man, that Tim Thomerson played in some of the Full Moon movies, but he uses that name in just about, he used it in like 11 of his movies, but of course, because we don't really know anyone's name except for Fender in this movie, there's Fender, Pearl, and then I think, like, we hear Gibson, but we don't really know anyone else's name, so I don't even know who played Brick Bardo in this. Like, it's I guess a German guy named Rolf, but I don't know what character he played, because they're all just dirty and they kind of look the same.
Yeah, they're walking in like a pack. You only ever see them sort of in a pack.
Yeah.
Like, ironclad fucking feral dogs.
Yeah, I mean, it is basically just like a street game from the Road Warrior, pretty much.
Yeah,
and sure. They're just chasing a lady Terminator. But not even a Terminator. She's a cyborg, but she doesn't have any power. She's not super strong or anything.
Yeah, one of the great surprises to me coming into it, and this seems naive in retrospect, but I always assumed Jean-Claude Van Damme would be the cyborg.
Well, I think that's why they called it Cyborg. It was originally called Slinger, which is what Van Damme is in this, which is kind of like a gunslinger, a gun for hire. But yeah, they changed it to Cyborg because you see Van Damme on a poster and the movie's named Cyborg, you're going to think, fuck yeah, this is like Van Damme's Terminator. I'm going to go see this. But no, it's just the Cyborg character is very sideline, like has maybe 5 minutes of screen time and doesn't do anything cool.
The Cyborg aspect is really marginal to the whole thing. That's absolutely true.
It really is, but I mean, it worked because, again, that piqued my interest. I first watched it because I was like, Van Damme's a cyborg? Yes, I will watch that. And this is before I even knew who Albert Pyun was or anything like that. But yeah, no, it got people in. I'm sure it made $10 million at the box office. Like, if you had Van Damme in a movie called Slinger, that probably wouldn't have happened.
No, yeah, that raises more questions than it answers.
I guess that we start off with the bad guy's named Fender, and it's his voiceover where he kind of lays out the plot a little bit, that it's a wasteland and there's been this plague killing humanity, and he's just, again, this guy's voice is so weird in this movie. But I love like the opening artwork where it's kind of on New York City and it is just like a big matte painting, but it looks really cool, and he's just talking about how he likes the future, he likes this world, the misery and everything like that, which he'll say again in about 5 minutes.
It's amazing that he actually does repeat it. And I have it right in front of me if you want me to do this.
Oh, go right ahead.
First, there was the collapse of civilization, anarchy, genocide, starvation. Then when it seemed things couldn't get any worse, we got the plague. The living death, quickly closing its fist over the entire planet. Then we heard the rumors that the last scientists were working on a cure that would end the plague and restore this world. Restore it? Why? I like the death. I like the misery. And then you have to scream it. I like this world.
Exactly. And again, big difference
Also,
with...
famously featured at the beginning of a song by Mortician. Go look up. It's fantastic if you like growly metal.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing is that, like I said, the original score was very like cock rocky, but I really like the score that they changed it to. Like the music in this movie is actually pretty good.
Oh yeah, no, it actually works pretty well, I think.
Yeah. So the big difference in Pyun's director's cut is that instead of that voiceover, it was a word crawl. And it was basically just saying that, like, after society collapsed, the people became animals, and then basically these things called pirates emerged who embraced evil. Yeah, they became evil and embraced Satan. And then it was like a few strode the narrow path between heaven and hell, warriors for hire, known as slingers. So it was like really into like the Satanism and the heaven and hell. Like Albert Pyun said in an interview that his original thought for this movie was just about like what you believe in and why, and like what would happen when society collapsed.
Right.
Which, I mean, it doesn't really. It also begins with Van Damme on the cross, and it's like a weird voiceover that he's not even doing, and like weird acidy effects and stuff, and then it cuts to like between black and white and color. I definitely recommend watching it if you've already seen the movie and just want a little bit more, but this version works so much better as a movie.
That's fascinating. I actually, thinking about the theatrical cut of Cyborg, it's actually pretty interesting that they do open with a voiceover from the villain. It's another thing. Not only is Van Damme not a cyborg, but our introduction to this whole world comes from Fender Tremolo.
Which is weird. He's kind of barely... Van Damme's kind of barely the main character, even.
No, it's really a movie about Fender.
Yeah.
Some flashbacks to, that we can talk about it, but, the gruesomeness of Van Damme's previous experience with him. But, it's just a strange touch.
Yeah. Well, it is, because you never really see that. And it would have been kind of funny if it ended with a voiceover and it's like, and that's how I died.
Right.
But that also does introduce one trope of Van Damme movies, is that he does have a personal vendetta against the bad guy. He wants to kill Fender. That's why he gets mixed up in this whole story. And this side story involving the cyborg that's actually kind of the plot of the movie. It's because he basically had a horrible experience with Fender before where he killed his makeshift family that he had at the time. And so now he wants revenge for that.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, like, his characterization in the film kind of taps into this, he's sort of like like a stoic character from a Western, or maybe like a Ronin from a samurai movie, where he's like, kind of like noble and he's pursuing some cause, but he's not really out to save the world, even though that's sort of like an ancillary benefit to his revenge narrative. He's out there because he wants to kill a guy,
Yeah, he wants to kill a guy. He helps those in need. He does carry around a samurai sword.
Yeah.
Something interesting that I didn't know until I was researching this movie beforehand, but did you know that Albert Pyun apprenticed with Kurosawa in Japan?
I sure did not know that.
Whoa. It doesn't necessarily show, but I could see those influences a lot.
Right. At least in terms of the sort of narrative thrust of it, in terms of the characters.
Yeah, not so much in the direction.
Not much in the direction, no.
Yeah, but apparently kind of later in his career, like, Pyun apprenticed with him and worked on several of his movies, like, I guess in the 70s.
Well, I guess I'm not that surprised. I guess I could kind of see it. Like, he's interested in the tropes anyways, if not maybe pulling them off with quite the same skill.
Yeah, maybe not the style, but yeah, I don't know what capacity he worked in, but that was just something I read from Pyun himself, which I thought was really interesting. Also, in the opening, we're in New York City, and at the end, we're in Atlanta. I put that in quotation marks, by the way. The sets that they used for this were leftover sets from a few years before from Michael Cimio's Year of the Dragon with Mickey Rourke. They were like leftover city sets that they just brought in a bunch of scrap metal, and they rented dirt that they put in places and then had the people take the dirt back out afterwards.
You can never have too much dirt and garbage.
Well, they rented the dirt instead of buying it because they figured it was cheaper to rent it and get them to clear it out than buy it and then have to clear it out yourself.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, but that's one thing I will say. This movie is ridiculous. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but the main draw, the reason that it's so watchable, is just this production design. Like, just the look of it, the weird lighting at times, and, of course, like, the action and stuff helps, but this production design is what does it for me. That's what I love about a lot of Pyun films and a lot of Cannon films, just this weird post-apocalyptic, like, production design they seem to get out of people.
No, totally, and I think it comes, a big part of that aesthetic really is rooted in that sort of, like, material necessity of begging, borrowing, and stealing your stuff to make your movie, and so it becomes sort of like, this invented, world that's created out of, like, the leftovers from other films and other ideas.
Which makes the most sense, like, for that kind of work, because if it's post-apocalyptic, you're just kind of makeshift everything out of what you can find.
Sure, no, it's accidentally kind of genius, I think.
So, of course, one of the biggest Van Damme tropes that's in this film is slow-motion fighting and screaming, which is pretty much every action scene in this movie.
Yep.
And it does, like, we basically get introduced to the cyborg lady, Pearl, and she has a handler, like a protector, who gets killed very quickly. But we do have this amazing, like, wide shot of the whole gang of bad guys with fire behind them walking in slow motion, like they're the heroes of it.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a blurring, like, it seems like Pyun's camera just really likes those visuals. He really likes the bad guys. The film seems more interested in the bad guys than it does in the good guys, I think.
Yeah. Well, and this film kind of, at least somewhat, with the production design and kind of a little bit of the story, parallels an earlier film he did a few years before called Radioactive Dreams, which is more of like a silly buddy comedy movie set in a post-apocalyptic thing, and it has like a noir throwback feel, but very much the same kind of thing, like same kind of visual, same kind of sets, like even if he's making movies for like $100,000, which he tends to do quite a bit, he makes them look like they're done for much more.
Right.
So I guess that kind of takes us into the opening credits, which of course are all in front of fire. But that's when I first noticed, like, I really enjoy this score, and it was a great choice to change the original score, which is much more like heavy metal.
Yeah, absolutely. Also the score is what's his face? Lalo Schifrin, I think. Same guy who did a number of things. I had this up. I was going to tell you about it.
Oh, I wrote down who they had in the credits, which was Kevin Bassanen, who also did the score for, like, Police Story and worked more as a music editor. But that might have been the original guy. I don't know.
Yeah, you're right. Kevin Bassanen. I wonder why I had this idea in my brain.
Well, it might have been the original person, because there was someone else that did it originally. And that was the more, like, metal-y score.
Really? Because on Wiki, it's credited to Kevin Bassanen and Lalo Schifrin. And Lalo Schifrin did all the Dirty Harry scores, Man from U.N.C.L.E., I don't know, Red Dragon, Coogan's Bluff, The Exorcist.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know. I just
Maybe
I
they worked on
thought
it
that-
together, or at different times they used bits of both of their scores.
I don't know. It's fascinating, and like as with many things involving canon films, who can say? But that's something that I caught on the internet that I was like, really, the fucking Exorcist guy who used to work with Astor Piazzolla did this? That's odd.
I can
You
see
know?
that. I can see them hiring like 3 different people to do the score for it, and they only pay one, or they pay all 3, but 2 of those checks are going to bounce anyway. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
so Van Damme shows up pretty quickly. About 5 minutes in, he's introduced by kicking a guy in the face. That's the first thing we see him do.
As you do.
Yeah. So he basically like kills these 2 dudes that are after the cyborg lady. What is it? No. Pearl. That's her name.
Pearl Prophet.
Pearl Prophet. Oh, jeez. But yeah, so he kills these 2 dudes that are after her, and he kind of tries to peace out after that. But she stops him, and she's just immediately kind of, and this is how we find it out too, but she's like, I'm a cyborg.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
But
Yeah,
they cut to her robot POV, and she's like scanning JCVD, and like, I can trust you. You're good.
And that's literally the only time we see her do that. I thought that was kind of amazing. I figured that would be like a trope that would be returned to, like in, say, a Predator movie or
Yeah.
something else. Like that was going to be a thing. But no.
Well, I mean, she really only has maybe 3 minutes of screen time after this opening scene, so...
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, and it also, oh man, this got me so much. One of the shots I love the most in this film is when she's like, I'm a cyborg, and then she takes her wig off and shows like her cyborg computer brain, and it's just this like stop motion robotics effects for the cyborg. It's I love it so much.
It's pretty great.
So he gets kind of put out of commission briefly, and the bad guys steal the cyborg lady, and when we come back to Van Damme, he punches his way out of a pile of rubble, which I thought was kind of awesome.
Well, his hand shoots up. It's like the fucking like the Evil Dead or something. It's fantastic. Mm-hmm. It's just his fist coming through all the rubble. Great.
Well, the sound effects though, which again they changed a lot because there were a lot of sound effects in the director's cut. Like when people were getting cut with knives, they were just like like blood splatters and the weirdest kind of thing. But yeah, it just sounds like he punches himself out of the rubble. So we get to Fender kind of destroying a village to get a boat, and he doesn't talk a lot in this movie. He mostly just kind of grunts and growls, but he does have a few lines like, hey asshole, I hate water. I caught a nice fish here, just saying like, oh, we need to get a boat. Like, I'm gonna destroy your village to get it.
Yeah, no, he's a pretty monosyllabic guy, generally speaking, but he has like his moments of outbursts where I guess he really wanted to convey something.
Yeah, which again, he seems kind of like in the Road Warrior, like a little bit kind of like the lead guy, Lord Humongous, a little bit, but he's not that intimidating until the very end when he like gets shirtless and is just fighting. Like then he seems really intimidating. Otherwise, not so much really. He's got pretty eyes.
We should add, just for the record, like the film is really invested in the notion of his pale blue eyes as a sort of like an organizing factor in how we're supposed to perceive him. I think that's supposed to be scary. That's supposed to be, he might not be that intimidating, but he's got these piercing, incongruously blue eyes.
Which I wonder if that means like that's why people follow him. Maybe like he's somewhat charismatic in that way or something.
Yeah, exactly, like he has a charisma. Exactly, or like some sort of mystery is associated with his piercing vision or something, but it doesn't really come through because most of the time he just like staggers about going rah, and
and he has sunglasses on, but there's like 3 scenes in this movie where he just takes his sunglasses off to reveal those baby blues.
Yeah, totally. And but we also never see people like he's always doing it to the camera. You know what I mean? Like it's not like there's a scene where he takes off his sunglasses and reveals his eyes to someone and they're scared of it. It's just like kind of implicit, I think, that would be intimidating. And it's really not, but I think that was the idea.
Well, I mean, there's so many ways to go from it, because again, you're in a post-apocalyptic world that, like, there's a plague and there's probably mutations and stuff. Like, you could have it to where maybe he has some kind of, like, mind control powers and that's why people follow him. Or, yeah, or maybe, like, he has robot eyes. I don't know. Like, there's so many ways you could have gone with it to at least show that, but it's more just, like, I guess Albert Pyun just thought, man, this guy looks cool with those eyes.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like, yeah, that would be scary. And now that's the beginning, middle, and end of that decision-making process.
Yeah. So there is a brief, like, I guess Blade Runner reference, because he does refer to her as a skin job one time when they're going to get on the boat.
Didn't catch it. Good idea.
But, and also we start getting flashbacks, which happen throughout the movie, and we kind of slowly piece together this story, even though it's pretty obvious from, like, the first or second flashback. But I love how they cut back, and Van Damme just has, like, this ridiculous long hair wig on.
I know. Yeah, I know.
He's like a dirtied skater punk or something.
He does. He looks very, very mid-'80s skate park.
Yeah. And then actually, yeah, more so when he's in the present, I guess, and he kind of has his hair, like, he has a lot of product in his hair, and it's kind of spiky. He looks more like 90s skater punk then.
Yeah, it's basically the story of a skater punk who takes on the forces of evil.
See, that would have been a cool movie, too. Like, kind of Gleaming the Cube meets the Road Warrior.
Yeah, well, I'm working on it right now, so that's my spec script.
I want to get a helping story credit on that one. I guess then his sidekick lady joins the movie. She is terrible.
The
Just
worst.
all around. She is the worst.
Fucking worst.
Her name is Natty in the movie. I don't think I bothered to look up the actress's name. She looked familiar. I think I had seen her in something before.
It's Deborah Richter, and you may have seen her in a number of direct-to-video releases, but probably not.
I mean, maybe. I've watched a lot of direct-to-video releases.
Then maybe you have.
Okay, so this is another person that tries to sneak up on him. He throws a knife at her or something, and she gets knocked out. And he kind of protects her, but then she kind of latches onto him and follows. But the thing that bothers me the most is that the entire time she's like, no, I'm going to protect this cyborg woman. Like, she's not going to die. And it's like, what are you going to do? Every time you do anything, you get kidnapped or punched in the face and you go down.
That's her entire role in the movie. She just simply makes bad decision after bad decision. And none of it makes any sense. And even like what you're saying, her allegiance to the cyborg lady is not grounded in anything. I guess maybe it's supposed to be like contrasted with, Van Damme's revenge narrative, and she's sort of like the voice of conscience or whatever, whereas he's just trying to
Just trying to
take
kill.
care of,
Yeah.
you just kill the guy, yeah. But
Well, what it actually is that, of course, the director's cut explains it more, as she was actually friends with the guy that was with her at the beginning and was supposed to meet up with him there. So I think she was supposed to maybe go with her on the way back to Atlanta or something, or meet up with them.
well, that was not clear.
Well, I mean, it's one of the things I'm sure Van Damme's like, we don't need this. Like, this doesn't have me in it. It has nothing to do with me. Why is this in the movie?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the scene, I'm sorry, you're doing the narrative. But the scene where they, he's like, stay here, and he goes off to fight everybody, and then she doesn't stay there and gets immediately kidnapped.
Immediately! She walks past a wall, and then all the bad guys are there waiting for her.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was a bad move on his part. He probably shouldn't have just, ditched her. But on her part, like, bad form, man.
Well, and also she makes a joke about it after that. After they finally get away from everything, she's like, I guess I should have stayed put, huh? And he's just like, fuck you, lady.
You suck.
Also, another reason she looks familiar, she reminds me of this one actress that's on the current iteration of Degrassi the Next Class, and she's also someone that I think is just terrible. Only on Netflix.
Oh, man. Fucking Deborah Richter.
Okay, so basically the flashback that we find out his backstory of why he's after Fender, and it's that he was hired as a slinger to kind of chaperone this a little bit older woman and her younger siblings after their father died. to go find a peaceful place to live, like a farmhouse out in the country.
Sure.
And in doing so, he kind of like wants to leave behind his life of slinging, and he just wants to settle down. He falls in love with a girl. He loves the kids. And so they have a brief, happy life together. And then Fender comes by and he's like, hey, let's make this ridiculous and out of control. So he ties them all up with barbed wire, except for the younger sister. And they're hanging over a well, and then he puts the barbed wire in the sister's hand and makes them like, oh, hey, if you can hold them up, they live. If not, they die.
Yeah. It's pretty bad, Fender.
Yeah.
Dick move.
Still, I mean, kind of an awesome scene, though, because, of course, she can't hold that, and it's just like the barbed wire cutting through her hands. And then, oddly enough, that girl grew up to be one of, like, his gang members.
Yeah, it's like a Stockholm Syndrome sort of thing. She joins the crew because that's her new family. That's like her surrogate family after she murdered her own.
Well, yeah. Deep. And I guess, yeah, that psychological thing, because he's like, hey, it was up to you. You could have saved him, but you didn't.
Right.
So I guess we'll take you in, doing you a favor.
Precisely, yeah. I really like in those early flashbacks how gauzy everything is. It's really hilarious to me. It's just kind of like a, like a look back on this halcyon age, this back in the day when things almost could have gone right. Everything's green and,
Yeah, as opposed to weird blue lighting and stuff that's throughout the rest of it.
Yeah, exactly. It looks like it's from another movie, and everyone's all happy and frolicking before the whole barbed wire well murder.
Before that whole thing.
Yeah.
But also, for some reason, it seems weirdly innocent and stuff. Because, of course, the older lady that he kind of falls in love with is like, oh, I can't trust you. What's the difference between a pirate and a slinger? But for pretty much no reason, she has like a southern accent. Like, she's just a southern belle for no reason. Yeah. She's like, oh, you ain't no different than the pirates that killed my paw.
My paw. That's what she said. And it's like, she doesn't have very many lines. So that's one of the only things we know about her is that, she says things like, you ain't no different than the pirates that killed my paw.
Yeah, which she has a line or two in other flashbacks, but I don't remember that accent being that strong as it was in that one line.
Oh, it's a little amazing. But yeah, it actually is, now that I think about it, it's kind of interesting because it is kind of like a vision of like a plantation, like a sort of bucolic vision of Southern, agrarian living that they're doing, Yeah. They're all out there, like, there's like crops, they're like raking leaves, I guess, or whatever.
Yeah. Were they planting something, or were they just burying something in that one scene?
Well, I don't know. But they're out there in the fields doing something or other.
They were either burying some seeds or burying like a Mentos can full of someone's teeth. I don't know.
Who can say?
Who can really say?
Yeah. But yeah, and then I guess so. That's what he's longing for, and I think that's supposed to also be like the world that's been left behind, and now that we've entered this dystopian age,
So I guess before we continue with the plot, which is very simple, it won't take very long to get through. But some of the other Van Damme tropes that do or don't show up, there's no explanation for like his nationality in this, which isn't really needed. But I always kind of prefer it when there's just no mention of it whatsoever.
Yeah.
He does do several like spin kicks and splits and stuff like that. Possibly one of the best splits he's ever committed to film, which is a split death scene that he does.
Oh, I know which one. Yeah.
Yeah, where he holds himself up between two walls, and then some guy walks under him, and he's holding a knife, and he just stabs him from on high.
Yeah, no, it's pretty cool. It's one of the better kills. I was reading he kills. I think the kill count is 25 in Cyborg.
That sounds about right. Well, because for some reason Fender just has like this infinite army that just never goes away or goes down. He just always has like 20 guys around him ready to go. But yeah, in every scene that he confronts him, he usually takes out at least 3 or 4 guys at a time.
Oh yeah,
which good show for being one dude.
Yeah, often making them like stab each other. It's one of his main techniques, I think, in Cyborg. I don't know if you can tell me if that's a Van Damme specialty, but in Cyborg, it's a big deal, He'll spin one guy around, slit somebody's throat with somebody else's knife, that sort of thing. Yeah.
He also has a boot blade in this, which I think is pretty awesome.
Yeah, Boot Blade's fucking rad.
Yeah. So in addition to that, I guess the only other real trope that shows up, because he doesn't really, he doesn't fight in a tournament or anything, obviously. He doesn't really get drunk or dance or anything. So the only other one that shows up is nudity and shirtlessness, which it has quite a bit of. Sadly, though, like, there is a little bit of female nudity in this, like, somewhat in Fender's gang, but also the sidekick lady just, like, has gratuitous nudity for no fucking reason, because there's not a love scene between them or anything. But Van Damme is shirtless quite a bit in this, usually covered in blood also, and also covered in a lot of makeup scars as well.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on that. The first thing is that it really, when the lady interest, I wish Deborah Richter's character, whatever she's called,
I think Natty. I think
Natty, yeah. The scene where she is topless is kind of fascinating because it really seems like I kind of just have this notion that like Menachem Golan or somebody read it and was like, where are the boobs? Like, we need a boob scene. And so that was the scene. But it also kind of furthers his like, lone wolf thing, because he's like he's obviously virtuous in that scene. He covers her back up. He refuses sex with her because he's just on a mission to go kill this guy. He doesn't have time for that. Or maybe he's just really respectful. I don't know. But
that's how it's played. But mostly when that scene happened, I was like, come on, lady. Have you never seen a Van Damme film before? He doesn't fuck unless he has to. He'll have you as a sidekick / love interest, but come on. He's not going to do all that. He just needs you there to give him a case of the old not gays.
Yeah, okay, you're absolutely right. That is very much what it's like.
Yeah.
But the other thing was, I think I don't know how this jives with like the rest of Pyun's filmography, because I haven't seen that many, but the various scenes of Van Damme's like bloodied torso and the crucifixion scenes and all that stuff struck me as like pretty deeply sexual in the way that they were presented. Like I thought they were shot in a kind of like way that emphasized the flesh in a really, it was like they're like lovingly shot in this weird way that mixes like muscles and
torture and violence,
and blood in a way that's really struck me as like intentionally erotic. That's
well, yeah, because it is still glistening in the sun even when it's covered in blood.
So oily. So much oil.
Yeah, and of course there's the shot of him trying to get off of the boat mast that he's crucified to, and it's just like his muscles bulging as he's trying to do it. His foot becomes an axe as he tries to kick the beam out from under himself.
Yeah, and we watch that shit. We watch it for like 5 minutes. That scene goes on forever. And I was just sitting there like, man, like this just seems like the camera is really interested in just like studying a body,
Very much so, and that's weird because that's not so much a trope of Pyun's films, because he's done all different kinds of films, a lot in the action genre, and a lot of like kind of burly guys ones as well, but never so much as this, and I think that might have more to do with this whole religious metaphor he seems to be going for in the film, like the fight between good and evil and heaven and hell. Like, I think that's more so he's just lovingly shooting like a crucifixion.
Yeah. Oh man, I don't know, but yeah.
This was Pyun's think piece.
He's grappling with the nature of death, suffering, and desire.
Yeah, because again, a year after this, he made Captain America, the 1990 version, so, that's not just like something he was really into at the time or anything. I think this is just, for some reason, he had it in his head for a weekend, and this is about as far as he got with it. So I guess we can somewhat jump ahead and just like they chase each other for a while. Fender's chasing Van Damme, Van Damme's chasing Fender, and it all kind of leads to this one big finale, this one big fight at the end. But there are some cool scenes in between. Like there's a sewer sequence which is lit kind of very blue tintedly and looks really cool. Then there's a running through the field, and there's a fight in like knee-deep swamp water, which was kind of cool as well.
A salt or it's like some sort of salt growing thing.
But there are also a lot of cool like weapon designs in this, because everyone, it seems like they said at one point, I guess, there's no bullets or technology, so it's all just like shooting arrows and shooting knives and stuff. So they're more using like paintball guns with like CO2 or something that like pressure shoot stuff out, and they all have like 4 spinning barrels, or I think the Fender has like a 6-barrel one.
It's actually it's like almost like a steampunk vision in many ways, because there's, it just takes for granted the notion that there wouldn't be all these other things, and doesn't really take the time to explain how they landed on the ones that they have. It's just how it is,
Yeah, because again, like, okay, maybe they ran out of bullets at some point and no one's really making them. But again, like, where are you finding CO2 cartridges to reload your gun?
At the old abandoned CO2 factory.
Yeah. So there's a big scene, like we said, where the lady gets kidnapped, and Van Damme kind of has to fight everyone in this old abandoned warehouse. And he actually gets to a point where he tries to save the cyborg lady, and she's just like, nah, man, I'm not going to go with you. Like, I'm gonna die if that happens. Like, you're not gonna defeat him. Like, I'm gonna stick with this guy. At least he'll take me to Atlanta, and then maybe we can take him. But no, you're just gonna get me killed.
It was one of the most surprising scenes of the film to me. I didn't see it coming.
He looked visually hurt by that. Like, she didn't believe in him.
We have fought so hard to get here. She's like, no. I'm gonna stick with the bad guy. I have a better plan.
It really it makes no sense. Like, there's a lot of violence in here, a lot of like pretty decently gory violence. It apparently did have to be sent back several times to be cut down to an R. It got like an NC-17 at first, which you can see a lot of the cuts. Like, you can see when they cut right before something gory would happen.
I have to figure that must have something to do with the Village Massacre, because I did read that, and I was trying to figure out like where the really awful shit was happening. If it, maybe there are entire scenes that are excised. That's one possibility. But of the things that stand there, the Village Massacre, I bet was a lot worse.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of it is just like a second or two cut out of a shot. Because there's one I noticed that was like almost a really cool effect, but it was almost too brief. But around this area, actually it was when they were doing the fight in the swamp or whatever, or in the salt marsh. There's a scene of him jump kicking someone, and he kicks a dude's face, and there was a shot of his boot going into like a paper mache face or something, and it was bloody. Like, there was a split second of that, but then they cut and the dude just comes back out of the water, and like his face isn't messed up, but it looked like he was gonna kick through a dude's face originally. Yeah,
I bet I could see that. I could definitely see that. A lot more exploding heads or something.
Yeah, probably stuff like that. So we go through all of this, and Fender and his crew with the Cyborg finally make it to Atlanta. And for some reason, even though Van Damme was crucified, he was up on like a boat mast, so he actually had arrows through his wrist and stuff. It randomly just cuts, and they're also in Atlanta now. And I don't know how much time has passed, but Van Damme's wrist have like healed now, and they somehow beat Fender and his gang to Atlanta.
Yeah, I don't understand how it happened either.
Yeah,
I just have to assume. I think you just gotta take it on faith.
I guess it's just like, well, it's about time for that third act, guys.
Yeah, it really, everything about the third act of the film is extremely abrupt and tacked on. Yeah, I would say.
Well, and this especially, this most feels like a set that was reused from Masters of the Universe 2. This most feels like kind of everything about it, even the lighting and everything, it all looks like it could have been a scene out of a Masters of the Universe sequel. They just put in a Van Damme martial arts fighting movie in its place.
Absolutely.
But again, it looks great. I love the set design. I love the look of it's raining on everything while this is happening. Like, it looks really cool, the kind of blue tinted lighting, and just the showdown between Fender and Van Damme. It's all pretty good.
Yeah, no, and actually there's another thing that we haven't really haven't dwelled upon is the presence of water. I think Pyun really likes dudes fighting in water. Because there's the sewer scene, there's the salt marsh scene, there's the thing at the end, the climax.
Yeah, it's kind of all over it.
Yeah, the whole movie, and it's funny because it's often not really all that watery. Like, they're kind of sitting in sunlight pretty frequently, or the flashbacks are shot in sort of like a gauzy haze, but, generally not a rainy day. but many of the fights transpire, they're just really wet. It's really wet.
Do you think that's just because fights look infinitely cooler if they take place in water when they're put in a slow motion? Because every fight scene is put in a slow motion, so you think, like, just you get that extra kind of, like, oomph of the water flying when, like, punches and kicks are flying?
Yeah, I think, like, the critical part of me thinks that there's, like, an aspect of that that's tied to the eroticism again, but I think the realistic aspect is that people just thought it looked cool, like you're saying. If it's in slow-mo and you punch a guy, and then a bunch of, like, droplets of water fly off of him.
But then again, the whole third act is just this buff bro standoff with these two dudes just soaking wet being rained on before they just, like, beat the shit out of each other. So it is very erotic as well.
Yeah, no, I think they're connected, I think.
So we get the big fight at the end. Of course, you know, Van Damme's down on his luck. He's going to get defeated because he's up against insurmountable odds. But he comes back and he ends up stabbing Fender, which it looks like he stabs him in the middle of his chest and, like, cuts him up and stuff. But of course, Fender still gets one last scare, and they get another fight, like, that's more inside, and he ends up kicking him, and he falls against a meat hook, and then it cuts to a wider shot, and now he's like 1.5 feet off the ground, like he got kicked up into a meat hook. I didn't understand that at all.
No, it's a pretty glaring continuity error. I kind of like when I watched it, I kind of thought that it would be cool if, like, he had hit it, and then the force of him hitting it had triggered some sort of, you know, fucking Rube Goldberg machine that then dragged him up. But that's the only explanation I got, because otherwise I think it just doesn't make any sense.
Well, also, he just kept kicking him up against chains and stuff, so I figured, like, oh, those chains are going to come into play. He's going to choke him with it or wrap him up into something. But no, it just kind of... And I guess that's the most disappointing point, is that there's all this build-up, and the villain is pretty terrifying and intimidating at the end, but then it just, like, ends all of a sudden. It's just like, oh, well, you brought out a knife, okay, I stab you with a knife, and then I stab you and you're dead. Oh, you come back to life? Okay, I kick you up against a meat hook, and now you're dead.
It really does feel like it runs out of steam, or out of time, perhaps, Canon film style. They're just like, no, we have to cut by 3.
Yeah, but this movie is like 80 minutes. It's like 86 with credits. Which,
Yeah,
oddly enough, Pyun's director's cut is like about a minute shorter, actually.
Really? My main problem with Cyborg was it was too long.
81 minutes? No. 80 max. So at the very end, the sidekick lady, Natty, she dies. Van Damme is reunited with Haley, who was the girl from the family that had to watch her family die and then went with Fender's gang. And they deliver the cyborg back to her people. And they just kind of end it like, oh, you know, stay with us. No, we're going to go back out in the world. They need us out there. And she's like, man, he's the real hero of this world. Originally...
The real cure, she says.
Yeah.
It's so bad.
So, in Albert Pyun's version, the cyborg was not like this good character that, or like everyone was after her / you know, trying to get her where she needs to go or whatever. But the cyborg lady is played as more evil. She's gonna do something different. It's kind of vague, but it's played like the last line of the movie, instead of like, oh, he's the real hero, it's like, oh, so can he stop us? And she's like, no one can stop us now. Like, the cyborgs are actually secretly taking over, and they were just using like, oh, we're gonna find a cure for the plague as like a way to get what they wanted.
That's a much more interesting ending.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, of course, it's much more traditional action movie, like, oh no, everybody's happy, Van Damme saved the day. But I like that they went through all this, and there are a couple of hints of it throughout that cut, where like, oh, maybe she's not what she says she is. Because even when she scans Van Damme and is like, oh, I can trust you, there was originally a voiceover narration where it's like, oh, he's good, he wants to help he wants to help people and stuff like that. You can use him to your advantage to get what you need. Like, kind of being a bit more mischievous, and then ending with like, oh no one can stop us now, like the cyborgs are taking over the world. Like, that seemed like a way cooler ending. So that's one of the few things from Pyun's cut that I kind of wish had made it to the film. Wow,
it's really interesting. Yeah, maybe I'll have to check this other cut out.
Yeah, do that. It's a little hard to find, but it is released on like I believe it was in Germany that it was released on DVD, but I'm pretty sure it's region free.
Can I just call Albert Pyun? Like, someone must have his number.
You might be able to find it on his site. I don't know how good he's doing anymore. I'm actually a big fan of Albert Pyun. There's one thing that I write for my site that is just going through Pyun's movies and talking about them. It's called Pyun's Playground. But yeah, he actually, I don't know if he's ever really going to make any more movies. He's kind of been suffering from like a degenerative brain disease. For the past couple of years. He's kind of suffering from dementia and stuff now. I was friends with him on Facebook for a little while, but he kind of slowly devolved to where like he couldn't even really remember much of anything. He was kind of saying crazy stuff, and I think he's left Facebook since then. But I don't know, his wife was really nice and just kind of like, he doesn't really know what's going on at this point. And he was working on like 3 or 4 different movies when he got super sick. So I don't know what's going to happen or if anything's going to come out, but if anything I write about him, anything I talk about, I try to champion him a little bit, because he does make a lot of really cool and interesting movies, even if they aren't, the best.
Yeah, well, that makes me feel a little bad for making fun of him, but that's I'm disappointed to hear that.
Oh, I mean, he knew what it was. Even on like his own IMDb page, it's like people say he's like a cross between Ed Wood and stuff like that. Like, he knows what he's seen as, but he does make really interesting movies on small budgets. Some are very throwaway, but he has made some cool ones, and I can give you a list of like 6 that I actually quite enjoy that are worth watching.
I absolutely, like, for all the grief we might give Cyborg, or I might give Cyborg, I watched the shit out of it. I'll watch it again in a heartbeat.
Oh, it's totally watchable. Like, it really is impossible for me to call it a good movie, because it is not, but it is watchable.
But yes.
Okay, so the final thing we do on this show is to give it a final Van Damage rating on a scale of 1 to 10. So 10 being something like Bloodsport, the kind of pinnacle of Van Damme-ness, and 1 being Derailed, something I will call a piece of shit every episode I record. So where do you fall on that?
On that scale, I mean, I haven't, like I said earlier with the disclaimer that I haven't seen enough to really to gauge these things. It's a solid 6.5 for me.
Okay. You're actually a little bit higher than me. Like, as an actual movie, I'd probably give it a 5, but as a Van Damme movie, I'll give it a 6. It's got some cool scenes, like that split kill scene is really awesome. There's a lot of cool slow-mo fight sequences and stuff, and that final fight is pretty cool, but mostly just as a movie, it's really just production design is all it really has going for it. But as a Van Damme movie, he kind of works in it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think he owns the screen. There's no doubt about it. And the thing about it, too, is that all these things aside, it's a pretty fascinating story that it even exists, and the reason why it exists, and the reason why it looks like it does, and so on and so forth. It's fascinating.
See, and that is, and I think that gives it a lot more credit, because imagine just being an audience member in 1989, and like maybe kind of hearing about Van Damme, maybe seeing Bloodsport or something, and being like, oh, there's a Van Damme movie, it's about cyborgs, let me go see this, with no knowledge of what Canon Films is, with no knowledge of how this movie came about. Like, imagine seeing it in that regard, and how that would affect you. Like, how?
I mean, if it grossed $10 million or whatever, $11 million, like, a lot of people did do that, I think. Those weren't Van Damme aficionados and Canon Film fucking weirdos,
I know, it's just interesting to think of, like, what were those people's reactions like? What was it like to sit in a theater full of people and see this movie on the big screen?
Right. I bet it was all, or bewildering.
Yeah.
One of the two.
Okay, so that'll be the end of this episode. Rick Kelley, plug stuff. Where should people check you out? Where should people follow you?
Absolutely. I run a website called LudditeRobot.com. It's film reviews, interviews with folks, and various thoughts and reflections. There are links to Twitter and Facebook on there, and that's my main stuff. So go check it out.
Yeah, it is awesome. Out of everybody in the Dissolve group, which is where we met, like, that's probably my favorite site of anybody's.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much for coming and doing this.
I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll see you here next time on Jean-Claude Van Damme.